Lieutenant General Rick Zilmer, United States Marine Corps, Iraq. I interviewed General Zilmer at Camp Pendleton, California, April 25, 2007, when he was the commanding general of the 1st Marine Expeditionary Brigade. I first met him in 2004 when he was commanding the Marine Air Ground Task Force at the Combat Training Center, 29 Palms, California. A year later, we premiered my first film on Iwo Jima on base at 29 Palms, and General Zilmer was a big part of rallying and bringing the Marines together for that event, and we flew in some of the Iwo Jima Marines that I had interviewed for the film. It was a great event, and he's been a great supporter of my work over the years. I also want to thank Brandon Glidden for his patriotism and his dedication to our country, making it possible for you to see a lot of the stories that I've been producing. Brandon, thank you for this story in particular. A 3-star general. I've never interviewed a 3-star general before. He was actually 2-star when I interviewed him. He retired in 2011, 3-star. But Brandon, thank you for making it possible for many people to hear this story. And folks, we need to share this with our younger generation. They need to learn about freedom, the price for freedom, and it's contained in all the interviews that I've done. And if you'd like to be a supporter of my work, you can sponsor a video too, one of the stories that I've produced. There's information in the video description and in the comments section of this video. So I'm excited to bring you this story. This is a first, like I said. He retired as a 3-star general. He's got a great story. Thank you, General Zilmer, for the interview you gave me 15 years ago. God bless you for that, and I'm happy to share this with you now. Please subscribe to this channel and share these videos, folks. Thank you.
Major General Rick Zilmer, from February of 2006 to February of 2007, I was the commanding general of 1 Marine Expeditionary Force forward. The other hat that I wore at the time was the commanding general for multinational forces west in Iraq. We had responsibility for Anbar province, which is about the westernmost province in Iraq. Our forces consisted of about 22,000 United States Marines, drawn from all over the Marine Corps, Marine forces from Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, Camp Pendleton, California. We had Marines from 3MEF and Okinawa, and as well as Hawaii. We had about 8,000 soldiers who came from principally 2 different combat brigades. One, a Army National Guard brigade for about 4 or 5 months, and then 1st of the 1st Ready Combat Brigade out of Germany. We also had a little over 2,000 sailors, principally made up of 2 CB construction battalions, and we had a smattering of U.S. airmen in that composite force. Our day-to-day numbers were somewhere in the order of about 33 to 34,000 combined U.S. coalition forces. In addition to that, we also had, for most of the time while I was there, and 1 MEF forward, we had the tactical control of 2 Iraqi Army divisions, the 1st Division and the 7th Division. So our day-to-day responsibilities were accounted for about 44,000 combined coalition Iraqi forces from 2006 to 2007. Since we've returned in the middle of February, the 1 division, the 1st Iraqi Army Division, has since begun to report to the Iraqi Ground Forces Command, which is a significant indicator of the progress that they've made, and that's really where we want to get to, is seeing those Iraqi units report through their own chain of command to one day completely assume this counterinsurgency fight that is ongoing, not only in Anbar province, but through the rest of Iraq as well.
This is a kind of a loaded question. I might be jumping ahead a bit here, but tell me the type of warfare we're fighting today versus World War II, Korea, or even Vietnam. Are there any similarities or the differences that you see? Maybe back to World War II, a defined enemy, as it were, a uniform enemy, lines drawn, you know, pushing in and taking ground versus retaking ground. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think we've seen, in some respects, we've seen elements of each of the wars that you've just described since the end of World War II. Is what began in our Operation Rocky Freedom in 2003 was a very conventional fight, if you will, against fielded forces, in this case the Iraqi Army forces, that resulted in our defeat of the standing Iraqi Army military forces in May of 2003. We had completely defeated the Iraqi forces and overthrown the regime of Saddam Hussein. So I think you saw the conventional side of that warfare, and we like to talk about in terms of the three-block war nowadays in our Marines and sailors and soldiers. What they're going to be exposed to increasingly in urban environments is that one day we may be doing humanitarian support, and the next day we may be doing peace enforcement, and by the end of the day we may be in pitched combat. And I think we've seen that transition now as the Iraqi government moves forward in trying to develop a democracy, which is a new concept entirely for that part of the world. We've seen the elements who are clearly opposed to that based on political as well as religious perspectives. And that has now resulted into an insurgency that is attempting to overthrow the elected government that has since evolved past 2003, going back to the fall and winter of 2005. We had provincial elections. We elected the representatives to the Constitution. So those were huge steps forward. The seating of a government. So we have a functioning government there, and now you have forces that are absolutely opposed to that, and what we've spent most of the last year and a half involved in is now this counterinsurgency struggle to eliminate those forces who are motivated by Al-Qaeda, principally out west in Anbar province, but you have an even different dimension to that when you look at the Shia-Sunni split that occurs in Baghdad and the southern provinces of Iraq.
Rick, how would you define combat?
Well, certainly this is what we are about over there, and I think while we are many times trying to explain or demonstrate the progress that is being made day to day in Iraq, there is in fact a fight that goes on every day in Iraq. And depending upon where you are at that fight on any given day, I mean, it may just be a sniper shot. It may end up in a pitched firefight with a small unit. But the combat that our Marines and sailors and soldiers face is on almost on a daily basis. When they go outside the gates of their forward operating bases, they are frequently engaged, whether they're engaged by insurgent forces in terms of RPG, small arms fire attacks, indirect fire attacks, or whether it turns out to be an IED attack. That's a very, war is a test of human willpower. And we are engaged in a war against insurgents who are, they are also committed to fight against us. So the combat varies from location to location, but it is when you're getting shot at, when you're in the middle of that firefight, and life gets very precious and gets very personal during those exchanges that happen on a very frequent basis.
Are these Marines that you were with in combat for the first time, basically all of them, or some of them? Or?
We had about well over 50% of our forces were there on their second or third combat tour in Iraq. So many of those Marines and soldiers and sailors have seen what I described earlier as that more conventional attack in the early months of 2003. Many of them were part of that. Through the stability transition to where we are now in the counterinsurgency. So the experience that our Marine sailors and soldiers have captured over the last 3 years, the silver lining to all of that is the strength that our services will have in combat leadership over the next 25 to 30 years. The Marine Corps, the Army, and the Navy are going to be well prepared for the leadership challenges of the future based upon the last 3-4 years experience that our men and women have gained in Iraq.
Do You think there's a baptism under fire for a new recruit or a new soldier or Marine in combat? You know what I mean? Is there an invincibility maybe among the ranks until the bullets start flying, or like a lot of the stories that I've heard? Do you feel that's true?
Well, there certainly is. I think baptism under fire is. I think that's an adequate description of the first experience for many of the Marines and soldiers. But I think, as you've heard many times before, that at the end of the day, what bonds, what brings these soldiers and Marines and sailors together is their support for one another. They fight for their fellow Marine, they fight for their fellow soldier. And that is what I think that's the strength of our units. They understand what the mission is, they understand what their responsibilities are out there. And no mistake about it, our Marine soldiers and sailors are as good today as they have ever been. They know what their responsibilities are in combat. They know what their capabilities are in combat, and they are very, very effective.
Just as far as the actual, well, you already talked a little bit about the camaraderie. Obviously, it's very strong among Marines, especially that I find. And do you think there's ever a sense, that you're fighting for God and country, or is it just a matter of survival?
No, I think they all understand. There's clear understanding about what the mission is and what we're trying to achieve in Iraq. So I don't think there's a question about what we're trying to accomplish there. I think that's well understood at any level. You could talk to any Marine, sailor, soldier. I think you get a very consistent response about what we're trying to achieve there. But I think at the moment when they leave friendly lines, and they've locked and loaded and they're moving out, they are again a very highly trained combat unit that relies on one another. I mean, it is a team. Whether it's a fire team, a squad, a platoon, or a company, it functions as a unit. And I think everybody understands their roles to the success of that team. And in combat, the brotherhoods that develop, the relationships are very, very powerful, very, very strong. And I think perhaps one of the lasting memories that I would have is we would hear the alarms at Camp Fallujah, which meant that we had battlefield casualties coming into the hospital at Fallujah. And depending upon what other things were ongoing at the time, we would go down to the surgical hospital because it wasn't too far from where we were located. And you certainly want to make sure you weren't getting anybody's way down there. But we saw a lot of Marines, sailors, and soldiers come into that facility, and you would watch the expressions, the reaction to the Marines and soldiers who brought their buddies in to the hospital. And that's where you really grasp this bond that makes the Marine Corps so special, as well as the other services, as they delivered their buddies for medical care to strangers who they didn't know. It was a very moving moment to watch those occasions. But that's the strength of these units. And as I had talked about earlier, when you had an opportunity to address units as a whole, whether they were companies or sometimes even battalions, we had some opportunities to talk to large groups. There is a special bond that grows out of combat that will never leave these Marine sailors and soldiers. It will be for the rest of their lives, these friendships. And it makes you understand why, when you see the photos of servicemen, former servicemen standing in front of the Vietnam Memorial, reduced to tears as they look at the names on the wall. That's the bond that is grown out of combat. And there comes a point when I think perhaps they may not be thinking about what the strategic end state is or what this means about national pride. It comes down to, I'm part of a team, I'm going to take care of my buddy on my left and my right, and I know he's going to do the same thing for me. And that comes through just like it always has in warfare.
In recruit training today, are the DIs focused? I mean, the mentality of recruit training, is it the fact that there's going to be could be a combat situation someday, and this is the reason? Is it obvious to the recruit, you think? And like in Vietnam, I'll ask the question. Did you know you're going to go to Vietnam? Was there anxiety? Was there apprehension? How do you think the recruits are handling that in preparation for being in combat, and and again that aspect of invincibility and baptism under fire and being there?
Well, I think today where we are, I think almost every Marine recruit enters recruit training knowing that he is probably, he or she, are likely to end up in Iraq as part of this, or someplace else in this world as part of the global war on terrorism. And let me talk about the Marine Corps, and I think many of these things would probably apply to the Army and Navy as well. But they know that combat is what awaits Marine forces. That's what we are about, and I don't think we mask that in any way, shape, or form during the recruiting process. So I think all our Marines come in there, the recruits, they know that's what's going on right now, and it is a war in Iraq. And I think from the perspective with the drill instructors, most of whom are now combat veterans themselves, and I remember the early days when I was at Parris Island back in the middle of the 70s, every one of your drill instructors was a Vietnam vet. He had a chest full of ribbons, and he had that combat leadership experience. And then, of course, over the years, those people move on, they leave the Marine Corps, they retire, whatever, and suddenly you're at a phase where you have very few combat veterans. Now look at your drill instructors again at Parris Island and San Diego. Most of them are combat vets. So I think they understand the importance now of the training that they are providing to these young recruits, saying the things that I am teaching you, the way that I am teaching you to think is going to help you one day in a battlefield environment. I think the recruits look to those drill instructors. They understand these drill instructors that control my life right now are combat veterans, and they are leaders who are trying to pass along to me or to train me to be a successful Marine, and more importantly, to be a successful leader one day in my own right.
How does Marine Corps history factor into today's situation, and maybe in morale or just the combat itself?
Well, I think there is a transformation that takes place. It begins when a young man or woman indicates an interest in being part of the Marine Corps. And I think we do appeal to a very specific segment of a young American society. We are absolutely laying out challenges for those young men and women, and as we've said many times, that when you complete recruit training, what the most important thing that's going to be said about you, or more importantly, the most important thing that you are, is you are now a United States Marine. And that is firmly built upon our legacy, traditions, and history of the United States Marine Corps. And so all of our Marines understand what's going behind them. And many times, when we've had, like you saw at 29 Palms, California, when we brought back those Iwo Jima veterans, came back to visit the Marines, the standing ovations they received from today's Marines. And our young Marines do not want to let down any of the Marines that have gone before. Those heroes from World War II, from Korea, from Vietnam, have raised a very high standard of combat in a profession of arms. And our Marines today do not want to let them down. So there's a lot of pressure on our Marines to do well because of the organization they are part of. And again, it's being a Marine that is so critical to that.
So today's Marine embodies the spirit of those that landed at Iwo Jima or Korea or Vietnam and in today's war. I guess I'm asking a question. It just seems like that's probably true. Maybe every Marine would feel that's been instilled within them in the pride and tradition. But personally, I'm just very intrigued by the Marine Corps. Like I kind of kiddingly told you, I feel like a Marine at heart after talking to some of these guys. It rubs off on you. But I think the thing that impresses me the most is the camaraderie. And when I talk to these guys, the older Marines, they cry.
Yeah.
When they talk about the camaraderie, their buddies, and then you mentioned that seeing the wounded and the dead. How do you, as a major general, how do you process? How do you cope with? How do you handle the casualties as a person and as a Marine?
Clearly, I tell you that's probably the most challenging, the hardest part of the job, and there's a lot of self-reflection that goes on. And most of the time, I think that was done during the evenings when I would do my condolence letters to the families, and I think that brought a very personal aspect to the war. It's no longer just a number of wounded in action is no longer just a number of killed in action. These are now very personal names, sons, daughters, fathers, who belong to a family back in America. And one asks themselves always if there's anything that we could be doing that could be done better, more effectively, more efficiently. Clearly the Marines and sailors and soldiers we had are the most important, that's the most important thing about our combat power. These young men and women, these citizens, are the greatest resources America has, both for the military profession of arms as well as American society. And they have elected, every one of them, these are all volunteers to be here. And we can't afford as a nation to squander any of these lives at all. So that is the cost of freedom that we face on a daily basis, and that is the reality of the war that exists there and in the homes and the communities here in America. But I do think we all sit and we reflect that are we doing the right thing? Are the things that we are doing making a difference? And as I said, we talked about earlier, I think the enemy we face today is an enemy that will not stop. This war will not end in Iraq.
You mentioned freedom. I mean, obviously one of the questions I ask the veterans is, what does freedom mean to them? And I'm going to ask you that question. Rick, what does freedom mean to you? And then again, maybe expound just a little bit on the price of freedom.
Well, I think probably one of the things that I think most young men and women who join the Armed Forces of America, whether it's the Marine Corps, the Navy, the Marine Corps, or Army or the Air Force, have an opportunity to travel and see the world. And like most people, until that opportunity presents itself, until you're old enough to appreciate what freedom really is, until you can appreciate how great this nation is that we call America, and what we take for granted does not exist for free. There is a cost for that freedom. And that's what our armed forces are all about. And I think all of our young men and women who, whether their careers for 4 years or 30 years, when they leave the service, they've had an opportunity to see those parts of the world. And I think they appreciate what America represents for our own families, as well as a beacon of light for other peoples of the world. This is the greatest nation there is on this planet, and as I said, there's a cost for maintaining that freedom. And the enemy that we are facing today is absolutely opposed to that the freedoms, the liberties, the democracy that we enjoy as Americans. It is an enemy is opposed to our way of life completely. And it's not going to stop just in Iraq. This is a global war on terrorism with fundamental extremists at the helm right now. And if we don't defeat this threat now, if we don't draw a line in the sand and stand up, I don't want my children fighting this 10, 15 years from now in some far off distant country. So it's right that we take the fight on now, because if we don't, it will come back to our shores again. And again, as we said earlier, the planes flying into the Pentagon and into the Twin Towers on 9/11 did not happen after we went to Afghanistan or Iraq. It happened well before then.
Good point. Tell me about some of the good happening over there. You hear all the bad stuff. I mean, obviously there's some good, so just take a few moments.
Yeah, I think, again, let me speak more specifically about the year that we spent there, and what we see as the key things that must happen there. The coalition, the U.S. forces are there, are certainly involved in the counterinsurgency fight. Again, we fight every day, day in and day out. But I think what we were trying to achieve one day, the ultimate victory is it is a battle for the people. That is, it's the trust, the confidence, the hearts, the minds of the Iraqi people. And again, the vast majority of Iraqi people want the same things that you and I want. They want peace, stability, security. They want religious freedom in terms of being able to practice their Islamic faith. They want their kids to go to school. They want to have a business. They want to be able to drive to visit family. They want all the sort of things that a normal population in the 21st century wants. We are there to help create those conditions, to empower the Iraqi people to be in a position where they can finish off this insurgency themselves. Because at the end of the day, it's going to be the Iraqi security forces, whether that's the army, the police, it'll be the Iraqi government, the national government in Baghdad, the provincial governments in Ramadi or Anbar province. Those are the things that are going to make the most important changes in the Iraqi people's day-to-day existence. So our efforts were largely drawn to trying to develop the two Iraqi Army divisions that we had under our responsibility, the 1st Division, the 7th Division. But also 2006 was the stated year of the police. And the important thing about the police is the police are largely local, homegrown. They come from the communities that they live in and they want to become policemen. We had, when we arrived, somewhere just under 2,000 police in Anbar province that were, and when I say police, these are young recruits who had gone to a police academy either in Baghdad or in Jordan, returned back, and they were taking their place on their local community police forces, whether that was in Fallujah, Ramadi, or out west out in Al-Qaim. And today, those police forces are now numbering about 11,000 police. And that, we believe, is going to be the critical element to defeating this insurgency, because when you have local police who come from the community, who are trained in modern police techniques and being servants of the community, which is a new concept for the Iraqi people. Police in the past, from Saddam's era, was, police come in the middle of the night, they take you away, and you're never seen again. But now when you're trying to incorporate these new thoughts and approaches to police work and community service, now you have police who are there on a daily basis, who are there. Hopefully we get to the point where it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, they are out there. But you take away the freedom of maneuver for the insurgency to exist. And now what we're seeing is that I think the battle is being won. It's being won by the Iraqis. They are more influential in that fight. And we're seeing many of the elements just leaving Anbar province because it's too difficult, and I'm talking about the insurgents now, it's too difficult for them to maintain any sort of base of operations in Anbar province, because we see this growing number of police. These are young police who receive anywhere from 5 to 10 weeks of training. We have now developed a training facility in Habaniya for both Army and police forces. And I think as we professionalize that police force, that's going to be the key improvement. We have a standing city council mayor in the city of Fallujah. We have the same things out in Al-Qaim. And our experience was where you have a mayor, where you have a city council, where you have a police force that's developing, improving, and where you have effective Iraqi army units. When you bring all those elements together, that's where you now begin to see the stability survive. And if we look further west, out in the Al-Qaim region, right along the Syrian border, huge progress out there in the last year that we spent out there. Fallujah has always, since 2004, we made a stand in Fallujah, and we had almost 4,000 coalition forces in November of 2004 in the city of Fallujah. Now we have a couple hundred Marines and soldiers there in Fallujah, and the rest are Iraqi police and Iraqi army units. And during 2006, we spent a lot of effort in this city of Ramadi, which is the provincial capital of Anbar province. And now we've seen some great strides in the improvement of the security environment in Ramadi. And the last piece to all that is, I think it took some time to appreciate, I think, how important, how influential the tribal sheikhs could be. And And that is a powerful element of the Iraqi society, and particularly out in Anbar province. And we're seeing now it's this growing acceptance, this growing realization on part of the tribes that the extreme Sunni insurgents like Al-Qaeda and other bands have absolutely no positive message whatsoever for a peaceful future in Iraq. And it's taken the massacres, the assassinations of family members, fathers, sons, children, and I think what we're seeing now is just this realization on part of many of the tribal leaders that we must come together and do something about it. And we've seen a noticeable shift now in the insurgent activity levels in Ramadi, I think in large response to that tribal coalition that's building. Now we need to keep the momentum going throughout the rest of Anbar province, and we're seeing elements of that in other areas. So it's, one, you have unity amongst the community, and now you have local police grown from those communities, and that I think is being hugely successful here.
As far as the warfare, the enemy, is there uncertainty in the field? And, you know, I'm trying to visualize a day-to-day operation, you know, maybe unlike World War II, Akabasi, Korea, Vietnam, maybe it's guerrilla tactics too, but is there, for lack of better words, a uniform enemy? Do you know who your enemy is over there?
There is, and that's the day-to-day challenge, is, you know, we spend a lot of time on, obviously, proper training. The worst thing we can do out there is injure an innocent, a non-combatant on the battlefield. That is the worst thing that can happen. Our Marines and soldiers and sailors, they all understand that implicitly. Again, this is a battle of trying to win the trust and confidence of the people. We can't be reckless, careless out there, and we aren't. That's not what we are about. There's a morality of this war, just like there has always been an element of morality in every war that we fight. And it's, you know, simply stated, we're the good guys. And but positive identification of the enemy without needlessly exposing innocents, non-combatants on the battlefield is a key part of that. And this enemy, again, he's very treacherous, and he is not reluctant in the least to fight amongst the enemy, to fire, shoot, and then try to meld in with a crowd of people to get protection or hide behind children, hide behind women. They do that on a very regular basis. So that is a tactic technique that he is not reluctant to employ at any time. Our Marine sailors and soldiers know that, and I can't tell you how many times I've read the reports that come in after enemy contact, and how many times our Marine sailors and soldiers have absolutely used great discipline, self-discipline, fire discipline on the battlefield, not to needlessly endanger anyone on the battlefield. But likewise, in early 2006 in Ramadi, we saw the enemy many times he'd be willing to try to concentrate and come against us, come on us one-on-one without any interference of non-combatants. And anytime he did that, he always lost, always.
Do you think it's more difficult today? I mean, I'm thinking of, you know, a uniform enemy. We're fighting the Germans, they're fighting us. We're fighting the Japanese, they're fighting us. Or the Chinese, versus, you know, almost like a Viet Cong type thing where, you know, you don't know. Do you think it's harder today than it was maybe in World War II as far as the actual combat that we're doing?
I think it's a different level of combat. I mean, if you're carrying a weapon and somebody is carrying a weapon who's trying to kill you, and you're trying to kill him before he kills you, I think no matter what the environment is, that is high stakes, whether it was World War II or any time in between. So I think that element is probably the same. What the challenges that we face in this particular battlefield are just that, is that you have a Marine or a soldier sailor out on a patrol working through the streets of a village or a small town, and 1 minute being asked to help perhaps on something as simple as fixing a vehicle, fixing a generator that doesn't work, providing maybe some on-the-spot medical support or help to a family or someone who has hurt themselves, to rounding a corner and being exposed perhaps to a vehicle-borne IED, a suicide attack. So it's that element, I think, of going from 0 to 120 is the challenge that our young warriors face out there in Iraq on a daily basis. So it's this constant up, down, up, down, up, down that they are faced with, again, in this counterinsurgency fight, being involved with the local inhabitants of a town, a village, who are largely, friendly. So those are the challenges that we have. Young 18 and 19-year-old, Marine lance corporals out there trying to make those life and death decisions. And as we've seen in this day and age, these are events that tonight are 6 o'clock news. So there are strategic implications, and we talk about the strategic corporal. And what he does on the battlefield may have absolutely strategic implications for the force as a whole. So I think we certainly expect more of our warriors today, and sadly they don't disappoint us. They are every bit as good as we demand them to be, and I am amazed on a daily basis that the level of understanding, commitment that these young Marine sailors and soldiers bring to the battlefield every day is so mature, so enlightened. As we all say of my ilk, if I'd been coming in the Marine Corps today instead of 30 years ago, I wouldn't be here long.
Did you have a chance to walk through any of these field hospitals or aid stations, and what would you say to a wounded Marine?
Well, first of all, you always made a point, and we did a lot of this. You want to thank them for their service and their dedication, and I know you've heard this many times that any Marine that we talk to, any sailor or soldier who is wounded, their biggest concern is always with their fellow Marine soldiers who aren't there with them, how their unit is doing, or if a buddy was wounded, how is a buddy doing. That is their overriding concern, that they have been torn from this nuclear family, that they are no longer a part of this fire team, this squad that has lived through the experiences that they have lived through. They've been taken away from that. And they all want to get back as soon as they possibly can, get back in the fight, get back to the unit, because they think they're leaving their buddies down by not being there. Again, another Fallujah event. We got the report there was an IED and a small arms fire attack out in Fallujah. So as they were arriving, the litter casualties were taken inside the hospital, and Humvee pulls up, and this young Marine gets out, and he's wounded very badly in the shoulder. He's bleeding. And as he's walking in there, I'm off to the side along with a couple others. He notices that it's, there's a senior officer there. And he felt it important to come over and not pass on customs by acknowledging my presence and saying hello to me. And I'm thinking, buddy, you need to get inside here. We're the ones that are certainly in awe of what you've done. But these Marines, they don't lose their sense of decorum. They don't lose their sense of responsibility. And I mean, these are just, they're the greatest the treasure that we have as a nation. But I think they're all proud of the work they do, but it's that separation from their units that they can't understandably take.
What does the American flag mean to you as an American citizen and as a Marine?
I think it means more every day I look at it. And this is the symbol. This is what we are as Americans. And this is, as I said earlier, this is the beacon, the shining light of freedom and democracy around the world. This is what we are as Americans. And we do have responsibilities as a nation. We do have responsibilities as a people. But that flag also is a symbol of what we are dedicated to protecting. And like anybody else, when those colors go by, those stars and stripes, it is everything that is good about America. And I, like everyone else, I think is just absolutely proud to be able to stand up and defend that flag.
Rick, what do you want the American people, what should they know about what's going on today in today's situation? I mean, what would you say to them?
Well, I think clearly our perspective is there's more to this war than is portrayed on 6 o'clock news. That there are good things that happen out there. I mean, certainly the casualties is a real side of this war, and it needs to be appreciated for what it is, for the commitment America has made to this war. But there are other elements of this war that I think, I hope, comes across. Our Marines, the sailors and soldiers, when they come back here, we've told them all, get out to your communities, meet your local leadership, your community leaders, whether that's the school, church, or whatever. Tell our story. Tell the people what's going on a day in, day out basis. And I think that's what we're trying to make sure that the things that are happening, this coexistence of progress with violence, things are happening over there that are going to make a difference in the long run. So I think that's the other piece. We're trying to make sure that the things that are happening out there from a positive perspective are being told, being appreciated. When I speak to the public, I up front explain that I don't intend to change anyone's opinions about the war. But I do hope that I can convey or portray to them the things that we are doing, the things that their sons and daughters are doing to defend America, to defeat this enemy of America, this enemy of the West, that will not go away simply because we walk away. It won't stop because we walk away. And we need to understand the implications of that. If we don't defeat this enemy of America and the West there, then we will fight it again some other day in the future. And it may not be Iraq, but it will be someplace. This is a threat to America. It's a threat to our way of life. And we either address it now here in Iraq, or we will face it again sometime in the future.
What do you say to people that, I mean, I guess you just pretty much explained it, but I guess I can't understand the mentality of somebody being opposed, you know, but I think today, I get on airplanes and there's troops on that plane, we clap, I mean, we acknowledge them, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
So maybe it's the minority trying to make a voice for the majority, you know, and I don't like that, you know.
I think, again, there are certainly two sides of this, of the debate. About it, and there's a perfect example of, well, why is morale so good? It's because Marines and soldiers and sailors, they come back and they wear their combat uniforms through the airport terminal to get their connecting flight to go home on their deployment leave, and crowds just erupt in applause and thanks to every one of them going by, and that, I think that's you know, it's not about money, and it's not about perks. It's about the appreciation of America who appreciates what we are doing, and that applause that a Marine, sailor, or soldier gets when he walks through an airport, that's what keeps him in the Army and the Marine Corps, and that's the affirmation I think we're all looking for, is that we are protecting America, and our sacrifices don't go unnoticed. And again, it's those small things that I think, and when everybody does go home to their community and we get welcome homes, we get parades, that's the message that I think our servicemen and women see and feel, and that, I think, reaffirms their decisions to do what they have done, whether that was to enlist in the first place or to re-enlist and stay on as part of their services.
Well, what a contrast to the Vietnam vet coming home to the you know, people throwing things at him, calling them baby killers and all that.
Yeah.
You think maybe we learned something from the Vietnam War, and today maybe as our troops are coming home, I know a lot of the Vietnam vets have been instrumental in helping, making sure that you guys coming home are going to get a better welcome than they did.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the. I think America, as a whole, as a society, has probably relooked that whole phase of our history, and. I think we have, in many respects, I think our American public is probably more attuned today to those sort of realities, those responsibilities as citizens. And I think, again, there's large acceptance, there's large support for the warriors and what we're doing there. So I haven't seen any examples of that or anti-military thought. But I think that there's also, one, we do have moral responsibilities on the battlefield. And if we ever abrogate those responsibilities, if we do not represent what is right about America and a moral underpinning to what we do in war, if we ever lose that, then I think we open ourselves to criticism of the American public. The America expects from its soldiers, sailors, and airmen and Marines the highest ethics in military professionalism. And if we don't do that, if we don't deliver those, then I think we come under fair criticism for that. So I think, again, I think we all understand that. I think America understands that. And I don't see that support for our warriors eroding anytime in the future.
With the work that I'm doing, I'm hearing, people comparing what's happening now to Vietnam and the body counts and this and that, but do you think being deployed as a unit had anything to do with the Vietnam vets being deployed individually as far as coming home? 24 hours earlier they're in Vietnam, and they come home and there was no transitioning phase. I don't know what you call that, debriefing.
Right.
Do you think that is one reason maybe a lot of Vietnam vets have suffered with the post-traumatic stress and all the things that are happening?
Again, hopefully we're a little bit smarter than we were 30, 35 years ago. And you would recall from your conversations with many of the World War II vets that after the island campaigns, they either went to New Zealand, to Hawaii, and pretty much sequestered off for a couple of weeks, or it was the transit aboard ship, the transports coming back. And there was that period of time, I think, to understand, share experiences with your comrades about what you underwent and what you just did. That there's a healing process in that. And in Vietnam, the example you use, in many cases, that's exactly what happened. We pulled a Marine or soldier out of a combat unit on a Monday, and by Friday he's flying back into the United States. And I think we've realized that given the gravity and the violent nature of war and what our Marines and sailors and soldiers have seen in combat are absolutely horrific. And there needs to be some amount of time, effort to try to transition, if you will, to decompress, to understand those thoughts, those feelings, before we get back home. So we have very developed programs now to do that before they actually depart Iraq. We go through training, mainly to recognize that combat does not affect two people the same way. It has an impact on every one of us, and every one of us is going to be different. So that is normal. It's making sure that everyone understands those reactions to separation, those reactions to the loss of friends or buddies, seeing the horrific nature of war. That's normal. That's part, unfortunately, that's part of what we do. Secondly, it's teaching our leaders and our fellow Marines and sailors to recognize the signs. If they see that, is that and many times that between, whether that's talking to someone in his chain of command about that, talking to the chaplain, talking perhaps to one of his commanding officers, talking to a trained a specialist who can deal in stress and traumatic stress. Many times that's the solution right there. It's the talking about it. It's helping one to regain sleep and rest patterns. Those are the things that make that transition. But it's having the freedom to sit down and talk about it in an open environment. That's the healing process that I think that we're after. Now certainly some Marines and sailors and soldiers are going to be more deeply affected by it than others. But I think clearly the overwhelming majority adapt very quickly and incorporate those changes and move back as a perfectly normal functioning member of society or their family or their military unit. So we've recognized that you just can't just pluck somebody out of combat one day and turn him back, and there needs to be an enlightened graduation process to get him back. And that includes me as much as it does anybody else. So we've done that, but we've almost taken a page out of what we knew once before in World War II history by giving our soldiers and sailors and airmen enough time, and Marines enough time to incorporate, if you will, those changes. Those are lifelong changes that are made. Our warriors come back a lot older, a lot more mature than when they obviously go off to war, as we have always known. But I think we're a little bit better about it now. We're probably a little bit more proactive about how we prepare our forces to return back from an overseas deployment.
What year did you go through basic training?
Well, I started officer candidate school in 1971.
So Vietnam was just winding down.
Vietnam was just winding down, and again, my experience, all of our sergeant instructors, platoon sergeants, OICs, platoon commanders, company commanders, everybody was a combat veteran from Vietnam. That was just, you know, and to really date myself, when I got to the basic school in 1974, during the course of those 6 months, you would receive addresses from a number of senior officers. Every one of our general officers back in 1974, just about, was a World War II veteran. I mean, these were guys who fought in Iwo Jima, Okinawa, Guadalcanal, you name it. These were the general officers who were, you know, I was exposed to when I was a young candidate in 1971 or a lieutenant in 1974. And that's that legacy that gets passed along from one generation to the next. And we make a point of not missing that, because as you've seen in our birthday balls, I mean, that piece of cake is being passed from the oldest to the youngest Marine to make sure we never lose that bond, that link back to what makes Marines so special.
I think you just answered my question as to your respect for these older guys. I mean, you know, we've come together, we've worked together, and I just admire that in you, and just hearing what you just said and how you've been exposed to that back when you first entered the military, and you're a Marine's Marine.
Thank you, Larry.
I just feel honored to be here today to talk to you. I got one more question about
Sure.
combat.
Sure.
I'm assuming there's air support in any battle. I mean, how important is that in what you're doing over there?
Well, I think that is what I would argue is, you know, the way we fight doctrinally, we come as a Marine Air Ground Task Force. That's just the way Marines fight. We have organic air that is part of all of our combat formations. The MEF forward, we had a 3rd Marine Aircraft Wing forward, which was comprised of attack helicopters, UH-1 support, utility support helicopters, CH-46s, CH-53s, FA-18s, Aviates. We had the full gamut, KC-130s. We bring the entire tool set to the war, particularly from an aviation perspective. And there was never a firefight that occurred out anywhere in Anbar that I'm aware of where Marine Air was not more than just a radio transmission away. And Marines grow up learning that there's that, you know, the big brother is always up there overlooking the battle. And our pilots that are working over there in Iraq, I mean, they are doing absolutely tremendous work. Some of it's unconventional. It's not the traditional things that you know, our jet pilots, our F-18, Aviate guys do, but their link, they all understand. And here we had, I'm trying to remember who it was. I think it was General Odierno, who had just come on as the new Corps commander before we left. He came in December and currently over there. And in his first couple weeks when he was getting out to visit the units, we came out here to, he came out to Anbar province, and we took him out to Al Asad Air Base to see the 3rd Marine Aircraft Wing forward. And there was an FA-18 squadron that was out there, and the squadron commander was out there. And so we walk up and hear all these jets, and their jets, aircrafts taking off all day, landing. I mean, it's noisy. But the commander says, General Odierno, this machine is designed to support that Marine, that rifleman on the ground. And I think that was the most fundamental explanation of what our Marine aviation does. There is this, link absolutely to the fight on the ground, and that's what our aviation is all about. And nobody does it better than those Marine aviators who are up there. It's not to say, I mean, this is a very joint fight that happens over there, and we were ably supported on many occasions by Air Force Air and U.S. Navy Air coming in off of flying out of both Al-Assad. So it's a very joint fight, but when Marines come to fight, we bring the whole battle tool set with us, which is our Marine aviation. And every Marine is conditioned to know that somewhere up there, there is a Marine attack helicopter or an F-18 or an AV-8 that's just waiting to come to his aid on the battlefield, and it'll be there as soon as he needs it.
This kind of personal, you're going to Okinawa. Tell me about what's your...
Well, this week I've been nominated to go over and assume the position as Commanding General of 3MEF and Marine bases in Japan. So it's a new challenge. I haven't been to Okinawa. So I should say I left the last time in 1994 from Okinawa, but I'd been there 2 previous times. The first time was in 1975, and every visit, or not every visit, but every opportunity where I had to serve over there, you always saw changes. One, to our forces over there, as well as the communities in Okinawa, Japan. Now it's been 1994 since the last time I was there, and people tell me, I feel reasonably current. It doesn't seem like that long ago, but many people tell me, you're not going to believe the changes that you're going to see over there when you get over to Okinawa. So I'm looking forward to it. Where the Marine Corps goes in the Pacific here in the future, I think we are clearly at a crossroads right now in trying to assess the strategic environment in the Pacific. It is changing, and we want to stay ahead of those changes. So we're looking at a number of future options on what our laydown looks like in the Pacific. And these are the changes, the decisions that are made in the next couple of years are going to affect our forces probably for the next couple of decades. So it's a very important time, I think, to be over there in the Pacific, and I'm looking forward to it.
Now, would you be deployed from that position, or 3rd MEF over to Iraq, or?
Well, no. You never say never. 3MEF is very focused on the Pacific region for a lot of different reasons, but there's a very, very focused existence to 3MEF and what they provide in terms of security in the Western Pacific. So I think that would continue, but clearly the forces from 3MEF have been involved absolutely in the fight in Iraq. So from platoons to companies to battalions who may be part of that fight in Iraq, that will continue on. But I think the strategic focus of the MEF will not change anytime in the near future with respect to our immediate security requirements. But the future focus, the future laydown of our forces is something that we're going to spend a lot of time looking at.
Just a quick follow-up question. What was the hardest part of your job in Iraq, and what's the hardest part of your job just as a Major General outside of the battle in Iraq?
Well, I think the hardest part about the job is, I alluded to earlier, it's a very joint job, and we all have bosses, no matter where we are. My bosses were down in Baghdad, who had a much larger perspective, larger view, and trying to balance what I thought our priorities were on a daily basis, as opposed to maybe what the Corps commander, the force commander, thought the priorities would be. It's a competition for resources many times, and many times we contributed forces to fights in other areas, and losing those forces and then trying to determine how you're going to backfill or how you're going to adjust for those movements, those shifts in the battlefield, took a lot of time and effort. Our Marines and sailors work over there 20 hours a day for the most part, 18 to 20 hours a day. Most of our folks are working that 7 days a week. There are no breaks. Every day is a work day over there. And I think you watch the grind, and you watch, I'm just absolutely amazed by the endurance and commitment of our servicemen and women. They work under that pressure every single day. And it's rare when anybody gets a chance to get a couple hours sleep. I mean, we work at trying to find those opportunities. But it's a hard day, and I think it's trying to maintain that endurance and trying to maintain your own energy levels over there, because if you're looking tired, it's contagious, and everybody else starts looking tired. So you certainly want to be as energized. You want to match the commitment that they're making. And I mean, as hard as it was for me, it's a lot harder for those young Marines and sailors and soldiers every day who are working outside the wire, or just making sure, during the middle of the night, that airplane's going to fly the following day. There are no free lunches over there in Iraq right now.
Forgive my ignorance, but do women fight in combat?
Well, there are very specific restrictions about what women can and cannot do with respect to combat frontline units. The nature of the war, however, is there are no front lines in an insurgency. Rear areas many times are as at risk as what we might call frontline units. So whether that's indirect fire, sniper fire, our women, just like our Marines, our women Marines, like our male Marines, are many times exposed to those sorts of threats. So when our women were on part of the convoys, the patrols that were going out that were frequently hit for one reason or another, or if they were operating, we had a program, our Lioness program, working at entry control points, meeting with women, observing the cultural sensitivities. Our women would be exposed to the same threats as our males were. So it was just important for women to understand how to put a .50 caliber machine gun to action, or a .240 Gulf machine gun into action. They had to know how to operate the radios. They needed to know how to operate all the weapon systems. And I said it to many times. I said, you will not go outside friendly lines unless you know how to operate every system. If you're going out in a Humvee, you will know how to drive it. You will know how to operate the radios. You will know how to employ every single weapon system in that vehicle. And that's what had to happen. And they all did that. So. And unfortunately, we've suffered casualties amongst our women because there are no front lines necessarily there. So they know what the expectations are, and never once have I been disappointed or let down by the performance of our women Marines or soldiers. And I had one example, I think, is you talked about the baptism under fire. And we had been driving down to Ramadi one day. We were going down to the government center, and we were in the personal security attachment of the first of the 1st Ready Combat Brigade commander. We were a formation, I think it was about 5 vehicles, Humvees. And we were going down Main Street in Ramadi. We got hit with an IED and then 2 RPG fire attacks. But at the moment the IED went off, I mean, it was like brown fog. I mean, you couldn't see anything. But you could hear the radio chatter, very calm, just keep pressing on through it. And we moved on to a position where we could get inside friendly lines and kind of assess. Quick assessment was no damage, nobody hurt. We got in there. And in fact, the lead vehicle had been severely damaged, blew out a tire, peppered the entire left side of the vehicle with fragmentation. And the driver was a young soldier, female, and she was as cool as a cucumber. And we talked to her, we asked how she was doing, because she drove through this thing very professionally, very, very competently, very effectively. But she compared that experience with her first experience 2 weeks before she got hit with an IED. So this wasn't her first time, but she was a pro at it. She knew what she was doing.
One more question.
Sure.
Okay. How much of a factor is the weather over there as far as what's going on? I'm assuming it's pretty hot in the summer.
I think we tracked 116 days in a row with triple-digit Fahrenheit. So by May, right about now, my guess is they might have even crested 100 degrees Fahrenheit already. The challenge there is that it doesn't cool off at night. It'll drop a little bit, but the temperature will be in the 90s even. I mean, it feels a little bit cooler, and your body does adapt to it. You acclimatize yourself to it. But when you're dealing at the high end, when you're in the high, 115 to 120 degrees Fahrenheit by 10 o'clock in the morning through, sunset, with all the combat weight, the flak vest with the plating, that's 35 pounds right there. So now you put the Marine with his weapon, maybe he's carrying a radio, maybe he's carrying water, 6 magazines, fragmentation hand grenades, maybe a smoke grenade, and suddenly that weight load is now up into the 60 to 75 pound range. And again, now you want that Marine, that soldier, to effectively operate in that environment. And what's important about this battle is, you can't fight this from the inside of a vehicle. You have to be out amongst the people. You have to be out there on the city streets, walking through alleys, walking through the marketplaces. You have to be out there. So our Marines, sailors, and soldiers, they learn to work with this heavy load, and it's first couple times it takes some time. But I think, again, we're certainly sensitive to the fact that we have to give our folks some time to acclimatize themselves, learn about water discipline, leaders to recognize the signs of heat exhaustion, heat stress out there, those sort of things. But I was surprised on the whole how few heat casualties we had while we were over there. And again, I attribute that to just some very, very enlightened leadership on the part of our young leaders, recognizing what their limitations were, how you paced yourself, and what you did. The other extreme was that I think people would tell you, surprised how cold it got in Iraq in the winter months, and part of our area of responsibility was location out called Korean Village, that was out by the Jordanian border, and at the Korean Village, rather, or Syrian border, we had snow out there. So I mean, and that was a big thing. All these digital photos being sent across, hey everybody, it's snowing out here. We had about a quarter inch of snow out in the Korean Village here for about a couple of days. So you really do see some extremes there in the weather, but the heat's the big thing, and that's and if you're inside vehicles, if you're inside moving from place to place, if you're inside a Humvee, an Amtrak, or a tank, it gets hot. It gets hot in there, and but again, it's hot for the other guy too.
You ever been to Iwo Jima?
I have once.
Okay, you have once.
Larry.
When you were there, were you thinking of what it would have been like to have landed on that island during World War II? As a Marine, was that the thoughts that you would have?
Yeah, absolutely. It's much like many of the other battlefields. I think and Iwo is very well preserved from. I mean, you can go to different parts of the island, look at it, and with your imagination. You don't have to strip away buildings or structures or highways, or you can look at the terrain and you can quickly orient what happened where. And of course, Suribachi is such a prominent position. But 1998, when I was a MU commander and we were forward deployed, my Navy counterpart, Captain Larry Nelms, who was the amphibious squadron commander, his father was medevaced off of Iwo Jima as a Marine. And Captain Nelms said, if we do this just right, because we're very, our movement, our speed of advance, moving from place to place, is very well choreographed in terms of how much gas, oil we're burning, speed, and all that. He said, if we're really smart about this, I think we can get a couple of hours as we go by Iwo Jima, and maybe we can go ashore with a couple of Marines and sailors who maybe have some affiliation, i.e. a father, uncle who fought there, and we'll take a couple people ashore, maybe some guys we can promote, award, re-enlist. So this became a mission plan. We started planning for this thing early on, and we estimated we had about 5 hours at Iwo that we could invest and still be able to fly in on our helicopters, and then at the end of the day fly back out and catch the ships before they got too far past the island. And so it was about 75 people, I think, is what it was. And we landed at the air station there, on the east side of the island, and we hiked up to the Suribachi. And by this time, we'd spent about 2 weeks in transit aboard ship in air-conditioned spaces. And this was probably this is late June, early July. And we came ashore, and as you've been there, you can smell that sulfur in the air. As you're flying in, you can smell that sulfur, which our Marines and sailors could smell coming ashore in 1945. We got there and we started this trek up to the top of Suribachi. And about midway up, it was getting warm. But I remember I had my chaplain, who at the time was 63 years old. He was a reserve chaplain on active duty, wanted to come out with us. And I was concerned about losing him on this hike going to the top of Suribachi, which was now becoming, you know, the intent was to get to the top of Suribachi and do some ceremonies. And now the mission, get everybody up there in one piece. But everybody made it. Everybody made it, to include my 63-year-old chaplain. We got to the top of Suribachi. He delivered one of the most appropriate memorials I think I'd ever heard. You could hear a pin drop on top of Mount Suribachi, and it was a great moment of history. And I think you do. You take in all those things. You try to envision the hell that Iwo Jima was in 1945, and the huge price that we paid in American lives to defeat those Japanese forces that were on Iwo Jima. So it's like many battlefields, you know, Gettysburg, things like that. You can still feel, you can still see the terrain, the island for what it must have represented. But it's a very serene place now. It's very quiet. It's hard to believe that the nature of war ever occurred there, that we know war can be.
The most profound thing for me was flying around the island, circling it and thinking of what happened there, and actually seeing today's Marines with the Japanese military there. That was a very profound sight for me. But this is the last question, I promise. Someday when your career's, I don't know if it's ever over as a Marine, once a Marine, always a Marine, but when you leave the Marine Corps officially, what do you want people to remember about? What should people remember about Rick Zilmer?
Well, I hope probably that they say Rick Zilmer took care of his Marines and sailors. And I think that's, if I'm remembered in that way, I'll be happy.
Thank you.